Well, good morning, everybody. This is going to be one of my classic broad sweeps. In fact, my book is rather in that category, trying to create an introduction to novices, a broad overview. But because I've written it in a rather different manner, hopefully even those who are already very familiar with Art Nouveau architecture will get something out of it, because I've planned it to cover stained glass, ceramics and metalwork. Normally books on Art Nouveau are written by city, but if you're into Art Nouveau and you are a member of the Art Nouveau research group, you'll know that there are around about 70 cities who claim to have a significant legacy of Art Nouveau buildings. And so to try and write a book now based simply on Paris, Nancy, Budapest, or wherever, would actually be very difficult. It would be more like an encyclopedia. So my book had to be selective. I had to choose the cities that I know really well. The front cover, for those of you who don't recognize it, is Antonio Gaudi. We're on the top of the Casa Batlló, one of his most famous houses for the Batlló family in Barcelona. And on the right-hand side is the no longer existing, sadly, main entrance to the exhibition, the Universal Exposition in 1900, Paris 1900, as we tend to shorten it to, which for many is the high point, the apogee of Art Nouveau. So many people are confused by the fact that I have devoted my entire life to studying Art Nouveau. I was hooked at the tender age of 16 when I went to university. A few years later, I went with my Aubrey Beardsley posters and posters by Alphonse Mouchet, who is the leading French poster designer. There was lots of Art Nouveau artwork on record covers. If you can remember back that far, they were works of art in their own right. And although they tried to wean me off it at university, with Renaissance and Baroque, I'm afraid I came back to it. Then when I sort of well, I'll be honest, I was made redundant from my university post in my 50s. I sort of took a new direction. I decided to become a museum curator and do exhibitions, but I also supplemented that with being an international tour guide. And I concentrated very much on Art Nouveau cities, and this enabled me to travel extensively and to get all the photographs that I needed. So my book on Art Nouveau architecture, really about 10 years in the making in terms of gathering all the photographic material. And when you're writing a book nowadays, it's the photographs that are important. I don't know if you realize how expensive they are, but the V&A charges you a minimum of £60 an image, and that's not even for a full page. So the photographs really come first. You can't write a book until you know that you can get your images. So this is to just give you a good idea of why I've spent my entire life studying Art Nouveau. It's not like Art Deco and modernism, in the sense that you are dealing with far more countries and far more architects who are very idiosyncratic, like Gaudi, and also sort of it's much more overtly linked to the social climate and to politics around 1900. So as you know, between the wars, we have Art Deco and modernism. So let's get that out the way straight away, because many people confuse them. So Art Nouveau comes before the war, approximately 1890 to 1914. And Art Deco and modernism, they're two quite separate entities. 1919 with the founding of the Bauhaus up to the start of the Second World War, which is essentially 1939. So these are short art movements, but very widespread, in the case of Art Nouveau especially. So in Belgium, it's often known simply by its French term, L'Art Nouveau. It takes its name from a shop, a gallery, devoted to modern arts, opens in Paris by one Samuel Bing in 1895. You could say that's Art Nouveau's official birthday. And the principal architect, however, is based in Belgium, that's Victor Horta. So we often refer to Brussels as the birthplace of Art Nouveau architecture. So in a French-speaking area, it's L'Art Nouveau. There's an entire subsection in Nancy, École de Nancy, which is the capital of Lorraine, or Lorraine. And this is driven by the famous glass designer Émile Gallet and the furniture, the ebonist Louis Margerel. In Germany, it's known as Jugendstil, which means youth style. It's named after a magazine, Jugend. So in any Germanic area, and that includes a lot of Scandinavia, they refer to it as Jugendstil. It gets tied up in the north with national romanticism. More of that later. Vienna has its own unique brand, the Vienna Secession. I'm sure you've heard of Gustav Klimt. And Otto Wagner was the great architect, Josef Hoffmann and Koloman Moser were the founders of the Wiener Werkstätte. Secession is also used to explain Berlin, Munich, Budapest, Prague, and Riga sometimes, because a secession means that you have broken away. In the case of Vienna, that's in 1897, and it's Gustav Klimt that leads out the younger artists who want to break away from the academic institutions of Vienna. We don't really have Art Nouveau in London. It's too dominated by the arts and crafts movement, but of course Glasgow has Mackintosh and the Glasgow Four. So Scotland for Art Nouveau, London, specifically really London, with the Art Workers Guild, Arts and Crafts. Catalonian modernism or modernista, Antonio Gaudi, Luis, Dominecki, Montaigne. They have lovely names, but you have to practice them. This is Catalan, remember, not Castilian Spanish. So the last of the triumvirate is Puig de Cadafalch. Just love these names. In Italy, they give up and name it after Liberties of Regent Street, which was the principal purveyor of modern art, modern decorative art in London at the end of the 19th century. In Portugal, it's Artanova. The most obvious representative of it in America is Louis Comfort Tiffany, and in architecture, it's Louis Sullivan of Chicago. We could also talk about Art Nouveau or Jugendstil or Secession in Russia, Estonia, all sorts of centers for it, believe it or not, in Serbia. So this is only the tip of the iceberg, is what I'm trying to put over. So the different styles of Art Nouveau, and there are many different styles of Art Nouveau and Jugendstil, comes down really to the individuality of the architects who pioneer it. Victor Horta is the master of the whiplash, and he's the principal architect in Brussels. He builds the first Art Nouveau residence in 1893, and he's often said to be the father of Art Nouveau architecture. Here's a good example of his whiplash, which is a line which curves back on itself. In French, this is coupe de fouet. And this is a staircase banister in the L'Hôtel Frisson in the center of Brussels, in the Sablon district, which can actually be visited. And the important thing really here is that even the most utilitarian objects like a staircase banister will become a work of art. He subscribed, this is Victor Horta, to the notion of the Gesamtkunstwerk, a very important concept for Art Nouveau. It's the idea of the architect being in control of everything, right the way down to the carpets, as you can see here. You unify everything into a harmonious design. Sometimes architects design everything themselves. Sometimes they work with a band of like-minded designers. Victor Horta was also very keen to use modern materials, a hallmark of Art Nouveau. It's the age of iron and steel, glass, stained glass, mirrors, which you can see here. So on the left is the L'Hôtel. L'Hôtel is just a very big house. The L'Hôtel Solvay, all the houses bear the name of their owners. The top one with the famous mirrors that face each other, which creates the illusion of the infinite line of Art Nouveau, is Horta's own house and museum. And down the bottom is the L'Hôtel Tassel, sadly now offices. Yes, I know, raised eyebrows all round. That's well, there's a desk there, as you can see, but that's the Winter Garden, and the L'Hôtel Tassel is technically the first Art Nouveau building that Horta conceives in 1893. In Paris, we have Hector Guimard, And in 1895, he went to visit a horta in Brussels and was advised to abandon the flower and to grasp the stem, hence again the curvilinear element. This is his most famous building in Paris. It's known as the Castel Barranger, as you can see, and this is the entrance to it. Again, emphasizing this is the curvilinear school of Art Nouveau, the coupe de fouet style. Of course, Guimard is most famous for the Paris Metro, which was completed for Paris 1900. And everything, again, is designed by Guimard, not just the fantastic canopies. This is the end of the line at Port Dauphine, but even the lettering, the calligraphy, Metropolitain, was designed by Guimard. There's a surprising number that have survived, considering 2 world wars, and also that Art Nouveau went completely out of fashion after the Second World War in particular. Nancy is an entire subset of French Art Nouveau, and the reason that it's such an important powerhouse is that it's the centre of manufacturing, the glass of Émile Gallet, the furniture and metalwork of Louis Margerel. We also have the Dome or Dome factory. And the reason why Nancy takes off is the Franco-Prussian War completely upsets the political stability of this area. Lorraine finds itself pushed to with only 30 kilometers of the new frontier with Germany. It is overwhelmed by migrants who leave the new German area. Obviously, they want to remain French. And this incursion of skilled craftsmen kickstarts an Art Nouveau Renaissance in Nancy. Oh, this, sorry, very much in Nancy, the style is floral. And this is a series of cottages on one of the many side streets. When you walk down a street in Nancy, it's usually the entire streetscape is in the Art Nouveau style, but various different formulations. So this is a very beautiful Maison Bergeret made for a postcard manufacturer. So again, you can make a strong case for Art Nouveau being very much linked to the prosperity at the end of the 19th century, coming from new industries like postcard manufacturing. They were the emails, remember, of the day, because you had, well, in London, you had as many as 5 or 6 postal deliveries a day. That always makes me laugh, I'm sorry. The staircase window from this particular house is stunning. It's by Jacques Grubert and is in the Tiffany style. And this is entitled Roses and Gulls. And Art Nouveau, conceives of a building as an entity. So the metalwork, the furniture, the glasswork, all of it will become part of this overreaching, harmonious interior, in this case, inside the Maison Bergeret. So, everything is, well, matching carpets, furniture, glasswork. So this is the Gesamtkunstwerk, as we call it, literally from the German, meaning total artwork. A lot of the houses in Nancy are quite idiosyncratic. This was actually built for an artist. It was his house and studio. Eugene Vallin was the principal architect. And one of the things that I love about Art Nouveau is its sense of humor. So literally coming down the roof is the cat. And if you think about it, this is one of the most dominant motifs in Art Nouveau art and design. I'm thinking of the Chat Noir poster, which is in fact not by Toulouse-Lautrec, but by Stenline. So just up the road in Metz, we have a completely different type of Jugendstil, because we are now within the German Empire. They too wanted to be modern, but the Germans wanted their own version of modernity. They didn't want to import the French. And Metz is developed as a new imperial city. So as you move north towards Luxembourg, you get a really interesting interplay between German and French culture at the fin de siècle. So this is the imperial quarter in Metz. It was redeveloped, as you can see here, in the early 20th century. And the Germans tend to mix some German elements into their, what they would call, Jugendstil, as opposed to Art Nouveau. And Germany was in general much more interested in the English arts and crafts movement than it was in French or Belgian Art Nouveau. So this is a private property in Strasbourg, as I say, another, now in the German section, if I can put it that way. And you can see here that it looks more Germanic in terms of its architectural references. And the same is true of Luxembourg, which also straddles Art Nouveau Jugendstil. So this is the prettiest house, I think, in Luxembourg. Beautifully painted, and it shows a debt to Darmstadt, which is the center of German, Jugendstil. So remember, this is named after the magazine Jugend. This is the Ernst Ludwig house in Darmstadt. Ernst Ludwig was very far-sighted. He wanted to improve the economics of his small principality, which is Hessen by Rhine. If you're not sure where Darmstadt is, it's near Frankfurt. And so he invited 7 artists to form a colony at Darmstadt in 1899. Ernst Ludwig was the grandson of Queen Victoria. So he was very progressive, very forward-looking, and inevitably looked towards the English arts and crafts movement. The important thing about looking towards the English arts and crafts movement is they've all read Ruskin and they've all read William Morris. They all believe that art has a social duty to improve the life of everybody, including the working man. So there's a similar temple. So I mean, essentially the Ernst Ludwig building is a temple to the arts. It was in fact their workplace. This is where the artists and craftsmen worked. And the same almost could be said of the Secession building. The artists didn't work here, but they exhibited. So when Klimt left the equivalent of the Viennese Royal Academy, they didn't have anywhere to exhibit. So the following year, 1898, Joseph Maria Albrecht completed this very quickly, obviously, exhibition space for the Vienna Secession. First Sacrum, which means Sacred Spring, was their manifesto, it was their platform, a magazine that they produced. And it's a sort of bit of a pun, really. It's for Sacrum, Sacred Spring, as in water, but also Sacred Spring, as in the time of the year, a reawakening of the arts. It's nicknamed by the locals the Golden Cabbage because of that amazing golden laurel tree growing out of the roof. There's a very close relationship between Vienna and Charles William Mackintosh in Glasgow, though technically I should refer to the 4 because there are 4 in the group. Mackintosh and his wife, and Frances McNair and Margaret's sister Frances make up the 4, the 2 MacDonald girls and McNair and Mackintosh. The 4 are invited to exhibit in Vienna in the October-November of 1900. Mackintosh and Margaret travel there in person. They're there for about 5 weeks. They meet everybody involved with the Vienna Secession, and there's this interesting dialogue between Vienna and Glasgow. In fact, it's sometimes called the Scoto-Viennese School, which is rather an amazing concept. You're thinking, gosh, that's still Art Nouveau? Yes, because of course, Mackintosh is very much inspired by all things Japanese. So his brand, his individual style is a very different type of Art Nouveau to that of Horta in Brussels. If you look on the mantelpiece, you can see some Japanese prints. And this is Josef Hoffmann and Coleman Moser for the Puckersdorf Sanitarium in Vienna after he's been Mackintoshed. But to be fair, it really is a dialogue between Vienna and Glasgow in 1900. In Hungary, we have a completely different version of Secessio. And I know you want to pronounce that as Magyar, but in fact, the G and the Y are a J sound. So it's Mudja or Madja Secessio. And they don't really like being part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They've already tried to break away in 1848. So nationalism plays a huge part in their particular brand of secession. This is Odon Lechner. He's the leading architect in Budapest. And he thought that he could trace the origins of Hungarian culture. They were celebrating 1,000 years of the Hungarian nation in 1896. And he thought that he could trace the origins of Hungarian culture in India, because of course of their language. Hungarian is related to Sanskrit. So he went to Rajasthan and looked at architectural forms there. And yes, I know it sounds ironic, but brought those back to Budapest. This is the Geological Institute in Budapest, dates to just after 1900. He also took embroidery motifs. As you know, Hungary, very strong folk art tradition, particularly in their heartland, the Carpathian Basin, and even more Transylvania. He haven't made that place up, by the way. And so he took embroidery motifs and sort of blew them up on a large scale, as you can see here in this acid etched glass, also in the Geological Institute. His most famous building is the Postal Savings Bank. Again, this was a bank for the people. It was to encourage small savers who might only save a few pence each week or month. And so they wanted a style that again sort of spoke, I suppose as the Germans would put it, the Volk, the people. So again, the references here are not only to embroidery motifs and folk art, but to the Hun themselves, as in Attila the Hun back in the 5th century. So the two bulls, which I'm hoping you can see up here on the top of the building, were inspired by a hoard of gold cups which had been found, which were thought, rather erroneously, to have been owned by Attila the Hun. So I often refer to that as the Hun-Hungarian succession. This is Karoly Koch. He creates a flight of fantasy, as you can see here, the entrance to Budapest Zoo. And probably the reason why I fell in love with Art Nouveau is I grew up in a pretty bleak period, if you think about it, the 1970s in particular. There wasn't much exciting going on in architecture at all. So discovering the sheer exuberance of Art Nouveau, the use of so many different materials. You're looking here at mosaic on the front of the main entrance to Budapest School. It was just, you know, like discovering Disneyland in architecture. You think this is wild, you should see the Elephant House. However, Karoly Koch takes himself off to Transylvania to really get to grips with Hungarian vernacular architecture. And this is, by the way, rather amusingly, Hampstead Garden City in Budapest. This is a fellow development. It was actually planned and largely sponsored by the government. And that's why it's named the Verkala Telep. It was underpinned by the president of the day, Verkala. And I just love all the turrets and the metalwork. So this is Lutyens, Budapest style. Nice idea. Riga, really out of this world, Art Nouveau. So there they'll call it secession, because they too were breaking away, in this case, from the Russian Empire and asserting their own cultural difference. Latvian had been suppressed as a language for centuries, but also there's a lot of money in Riga at the end of the 19th century, and this is by Mikhail Eisenstein, and it looks like he's thrown everything, doesn't it, at the facade. But what are particularly Art Nouveau in terms of their sort of like preferences are the ladies' faces, mascaron, so these big masks, and the giant peacock in the center. They loved peacocks. They were symbolic of this idea of a renewal in art and design. This is also by Mikhail Eisenstein, and if you go to visit Riga, all the Art Nouveau is very concentrated, so it's quite good from a walking point of view. There's a lot down Alberta Strasse, or Ilia, and there's a lot down Elisabetta Strasse as well. So this is another building where Eisenstein has brought in colour with the blue bricks. It's a sort of subset. There's three of these in Budapest. But one of his pupils was Eisen Laub, and he was attracted to this idea that you could actually, like Odon Lechner, develop an indigenous Latvian architectural style by looking back to medieval vernacular forms. So as you can see, this is quite different. And also, as in Hungary, they look at folk art in detail. sort of reworking embroidery motifs, though the principal Latvian contribution to folk art is singing. That was really how the Latvian traditions survived years of oppression, either by the Germans or the Russians. They also, in Riga, looked to Finland, where their version of Jugendstil blends into national romanticism. Again, Finland feels oppressed, first of all by Sweden, then by Russia. It doesn't become an autonomous independent country until 1917. It looks back to its Viking origins, but also its medieval ones, and it sort of mixes it all together to come up with this northern Jugendstil national romantic style with those very distinctive flattened arches. Modernista in Barcelona, it's a similar story. It's about nationalism. They want to break away. It's not changed from Castilian Spain. They too have been suppressed. The easiest way to suppress anybody is to deny your language. And Catalan, like Latvian, like Estonian, like any of the countries that we're talking about, the obvious way to repress them had been through their language. So there's an amazing renaissance of all aspects of Catalan art at the end of the 19th century. Gaudi is only one of many. This is La Pedera, or the quarry, that's its nickname, the Casa Mia. But my favorite building, in fact, really makes Gaudi look like he's not really trying that hard to blow your mind. But my favorite building in Barcelona is the Paula de Catalunya. This is their amazing concert hall, because again, singing is a really important way in which Catalan identity was expressed. And this amazing concert hall is by Dominecki Montenegro, or Dominecki Montenegro. In Italy, it's about unification. So they are again celebrating Italian identity, but linking it very much to modernism. So the Centre of Liberty style, named after liberties of Regent Street, Turin and Milan, because these cities are industrializing. And by the way, Turin was the first capital of a unified Italy. The architect here is Fenolio, and he is very into sort of the curvilinear aspects that we've looked at in Paris and in Brussels. Here's a close-up of the window, which is in Tiffany style. Fenolio, and we're in Turin, which is a subsection of Turin, which is just all Art Nouveau. We're now in Milan, which again was, very wealthy at this stage. Industrialization, the arrival of the Simplon Tunnel, and this is by Sommaruga, who has quite a different style to Fenolio. So one thing I really want to emphasize is why it's so much fun studying Art Nouveau, Jugendstil, or Liberty, is that every architect has his own brand. It's all about individuality. When you get into modernism, it's the exact opposite. It's all about standardization. If you look at the Bauhaus and De Stijl, well, there's hardly any difference. It's all clean lines, cubic shapes, and no decoration. Whereas Art Nouveau is the exact opposite. It's all about self-expression, and in all forms of art. So stained glass, but here particularly metalwork by the wonderfully named Mazzucatelli, who was seen to be the magician of ironwork. Also in Milan, this is the Palazzo Campini, a rival to Sommaruga. Love the doorway, and again the amazing metalwork in his ribbon style is by Mazzucatelli. Entire streetscapes in Milan. So this is a whole row of Liberty style houses. Sadly, on the other side, it's all modern, because we forget, in fact, that Milan was quite badly damaged in the war. But I just love the fact that you can look down an entire row of houses. They're not all by the same architect, and there's a lot of variety, that, as you can see. But look at the concentration of decoration around the windows, the balconies, and then often a frieze along the top. So sometimes Art Nouveau, Jugendstil, Secession, or Liberty is only skin deep. Everything is thrown on the facade. A good example of that is this. in Aveiro, which is the epicenter for Artanova in Portugal. This was created for the Pessoa family. Behind that exuberant facade, the house is actually quite conventional. It's like all the money has gone on the outside. I do particularly like the sunflowers and this entrance portal, which is a wonderful interpretation of the coupe de fouet or whiplash style of Horta and Guimard, and I love the tiles as well. So hopefully you're getting a good idea that Art Nouveau relies very much on shocking you, often in its use of materials, tile, stained glass, sculpture and metalwork. This is not in Aveiro, but on the way there by De Pinho, a local architect. And that's yellow tile, by the way, all over it. The ladies' heads remind me of Mucha, and the window openings are, you know, tripartite, and the sort of arrangement of them are typical of the Art Nouveau Jugendstil vocabulary. So that was a brief sweep of all the different places that you can go to study Art Nouveau architecture. What I want to do in the last half of our time together is to show you how Art Nouveau was not just for the rich. It affected everybody because it completely changes cities. So this is a metro station, courtesy of the Vienna Secession. It's a combination of a design by Otto Wagner, but the decoration is by Joseph Maria Olbrecht, who had designed the Secession House. It's sometimes known as the golden phase of the Vienna Secession. So these are all stations. So we're now in Valencia, in the Stacionio de Nord, and that's all tile. This is Porto, something like 30,000 painted tiles by an artist by the name of Colaco. Took him years, by the way, to paint them, and the tile panels tell the story of Portuguese, well, particularly Porto's history. So that's Portugal. The tiles in the station in Valencia are all of the local landscape, the distinctive local landscape around Valencia. And this is the main station in St. Petersburg. So you just see what I mean about how broad, what a broad spectrum of countries I'm trying to introduce you to. Secular buildings, I thought, let's get away from the Sagrada Familia and show you Otto Wagner's masterpiece. This is Am Steinhof, fabulous church in Vienna, sometimes known as the Golden Lemon in this case because of its gilded dome. And this is the interior. This is a Gesamtkunstwerk, but with Otto Wagner working with a team that included Koloman Moser and Othmar Schenkovich for all the sculptural work. The emperor hated it, by the way. He did not like Vienna Secession at all. That's Franz Josef. And hospitals. So the most dramatic hospital that I've ever visited in the Art Nouveau Jugendstil style is in Barcelona. This is the Hospital San Pau. You're looking on the right-hand side at two hospital wards, believe it or not. The image on the left-hand side is the main entrance, the administrative block, and the architect of this is Louis Dominecki in Montenegro, who many sort of people think of almost as Gaudi's mentor. We're in Strasbourg here because one of the reasons why Art Nouveau takes off is improved educational opportunities. I could have shown you the Glasgow School of Art at this point, but as you know, we're still upset because we burnt it down twice. So I thought I'd show you one that you might not expect, which is in Strasbourg. This was a powerhouse, not just for men, but for women, ceramics designers, stained glass designers, metalwork, the art schools provided the training and the foundation for entering what were known as the art industries. The distinguishing feature here is tile. So this is archaeology, which I started my career in. This is pictura, and here's a close-up of pictura showing you holding her palette. These might be by Villeroy and Boch. I have not yet actually, I've identified the designers, but I'm not sure who the maker is. A Dalton would be the equivalent in this country. This is a bank building in Nancy by Émile André, and Paul Charbonnier. They sort of again worked on it together, both exterior and interior. It looks like a sort of bit of a Gothic horror as well, doesn't it? But the inside is largely due to Louis Margerel, who did the metal work. And it always makes me laugh that the theme for this bank is monnaie de pape in the French, honesty in the English. Well, the monnaie de pape is obvious, wealth, it's a bank. But it has a double edge, doesn't it, in English, when you say that it's the motif is honesty in a bank. So the Gesamtkunstwerk can be one man working on his own, or it can be a collaboration. And the École de Nancy is a very good example. So, you know, Margerel would do the metalwork and Jacques Grubert would do the stained glass. So this is Grubert's masterpiece in the Crédit Lyonnais. It's the biggest stained glass. Well, they call it stained glass, but really it isn't. It's leaded glass in the Tiffany style. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Shops. And the most overt Art Nouveau interior in London is Harrods, courtesy of Dalton, fitted in 12 weeks. Don't try that now. Designer for Dalton is William James Neatby. This is the interior of the Galeries Lafayette. Most of the interior here is a collaboration of the École de Nancy artists, Margerel and Gruber in particular. This is the beautifully preserved shop, jewelry shop. You'll find it rebuilt in the Musée Carnavalet, which is the Museum of Paris, and was the shop of Monsieur Fouquet, who was one of the rivals of René Lalique. And this is all that survives of a very beautiful shop in Nancy. It's just the frontage to remind you that Art Nouveau is swept away, firstly by Art Deco, and then by the fact that all of this goes out of fashion in the post-Second World War era. And this is the front of a building that I spotted in Brussels. It's a whole series of tile panels, commerce, and it's actually the shop was for luxuries for ladies. So ribbons and silks. It's right in the centre of Brussels. So one of the most outstanding architectural collections. Sorry? I heard somebody. One of the most outstanding shops I've ever come across is Old England by Paul Santenoy in Brussels. The shop on the right-hand side in Luxembourg, so on the left-hand side in Luxembourg, would have looked like Old England. But again, as Art Nouveau went out of fashion, much of its decoration has been stripped away. But I wanted to remind you how much this relies on new technology. It's the era of metal and glass. So iron frame, steel frame, and then glass infill, because of course what you want to be able to do is to show your commodities at their best. We're in Porto here, and this is a debenture. It's an iron framed front to a shop. And the nice thing about running around all these cities is that you need to stop to have a cup of tea, or in this case in Porto, this is my group, and we've stopped for coffee and cake. So this section is all about eating. My favorite restaurant in Nancy, the Excelsior, interior by Jacques Grubert. My favorite restaurant in Paris, the Bouillon Julien. And this one is now known as Montmartre, Montparnasse 1900. Well, you can have an entire holiday just going around Paris and collecting what traditionally are known as the bouillons. That was their original name. Again, they were, designed for everybody, working class through to middle class. They were not just for the upper reaches, though they have rather gone that way more recently. And many of them are related to the enterprise of the Chartier brothers. So this is La Bouillon Racine is the one on the left in the sort of rather pretty green colour. Stained glass. So I want to just end with just, the reasons that I love Art Nouveau so much. It's all the decorative elements. So if you had a house, it could be an individual maison at the top. It could be semi-detached on the left, or you could have an apartment. But you are likely to have a winter garden using all the latest technology. This is one of the winter gardens in Nancy. This is actually the Maison Bergeret again. And the important thing is in the glass, the new technology is not just Tiffany, it's dichroic glass, which appears Hot on the inside, hot colours on the inside, cold colours on the outside. Winter gardens are really important. You fill them with flowers. So the winter garden on the left is water, the Frisson house again, and on the right-hand side, the Hanon house in Brussels. But winter gardens are really, really popular. And stained glass was absolutely essential to diffuse the light. Even in relatively small windows, you would have panels to either side, as you can see here. These are all windows, by the way, in Luxembourg. That's a door entrance with etched glass and is by Fenolio and is in Turin. And then this bottom one again is, we're back in Nancy. But can you see how distinctive all the window shapes are, like horseshoe shapes or tripartite shapes? This is a good way again to identify Art Nouveau buildings. And stained glass, the top one is in Barcelona. This one is a rescued window. It's in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. This is still in situ. It's in the L'Hôtel Saint-Honoré in Brussels. This is an amazing window in Villa Wagner #1, so we're in Vienna. This is the ceiling of the Paula de Catalunya, stunning, like teardrop in the center. And this is to remind you, even quite modest houses have fantastic stained glass. I'd like that one because I've got to think about peacocks. Art Nouveau loved peacocks because it was eternal beauty, or the idea that beauty never dies. Ars longa vita. Hang on, I got that wrong. Probably have done, but you know, life is short, but art endures. That's the important bit. And this is an overdoor in Vienna. This is Villa Wagner #2. So glass is used very inventively. It's not just in churches. The real pioneer of stained glass, well, I should say again, leaded glass, is of course Tiffany. He uses plating, which you're looking at there on the left-hand side, which is layers of glass. And he comes up with new technologies for drapery. Yes, you've guessed it. It's called drapery glass, which you can see in my close-up is literally like folds of molten glass to create the illusion of the robe of this rather beautiful angel. And the dichroic element is fascinating. So here we're looking at an internal screen, but it appears blue and cold in the entrance. You go round into the dining room because it's a partition between the entrance and the dining room, and all the colours are warm. It's a chemical process, by the way. You can ask me more about it if the chemistry of glass interests you. And this is Jacques Gruber, who used his acid etching to come up with a very unique doorway in this case, which dates to about 1904, in the only Art Nouveau aquarium I've ever been to visit. And this is Miska Orot in Hungary. He takes up the challenge of Tiffany glass, actually imports Tiffany style glass, iridescent and textured. And this is, takes us back really to what Art Nouveau is, why it's so exciting. Louis or Leos Kossuth was the revolutionary leader that tried to lead Hungary to independence in 1848-49, but failed. Nationalism being such an important ingredient in so many Art Nouveau cities. So to finish, sculpture, because that's another way in which the buildings were enriched, sculpture and tile. So female heads, mascaron. The top one is Milan. The one on the right-hand side is Luxembourg. This is Strasbourg, and this is Metz. So sometimes I refer to these as bestiaries. You get gargoyles and lots of creatures. That's a frog trying to eat a dragonfly. The sculpture in Milan is really over the top. These two young ladies here on a building by Sommaruga are known as, you know, the ladies with the buttocks. I like that. And this is the building just covered, as you can see, with cherubs by Sommaruga. It's an amazing villa which was acquired, in fact, by one of the big car manufacturers. You know, Milan Fiat obviously is Turin. So the Alfa Romeo villa, ceramics, and this is back in Turin. I don't know what these ladies are doing on the top of this building, but it's obviously something to do with classical mythology, with the central figure riding on the back of an eagle. So many of the books on Art Nouveau are not in English. It requires a lot of scholarship to read Hungarian, Latvian, Italian, to try and work out who has thought about the symbolism of these architectural and decorative forms. So metalwork here, Mazzucatelli with his butterflies. Again, that's the idea of sort of like the fugitive elements of beauty. The whiplash really coming out in Brussels. My peacocks again there in the amazing Gresham Palace, now a hotel in Budapest. And this is me just taking a close-up of a gate in Nancy on a fairly ordinary house. So it's a really classic example of the whiplash. But the master of metalwork is Majorelle, so the entrance to his own villa, and the big canopies, which are such a feature in Paris in the Art Nouveau era, you know, around 1900. And this is one I've still got to research. This is a gate that I discovered in Strasbourg, but I don't know who designed it, and I don't know where it was made. But I think you'll agree it's a riot of the coupe de fouet whiplash motif. So the last section, you'll be relieved to know, ceramics. So a close-up of that amazing roof of the Postal Savings Bank with the two bulls inspired by this golden hoard found in modern-day Romania and said erroneously to have belonged to Attila the Hun, 5th century AD. Down the bottom, all of this is Jolne, by the way, which is the big factory in Hungary to this day. Down the bottom is their technique called eosin, which is an iridescent type of architectural ceramic. The bulls are made in pyrogranite, you'll be pleased to know. My cover, all ceramic. I mean, ceramics, again, really important, part of the Islamic legacy in Budapest. That, believe it or not, is Art Nouveau in Norwich. Couldn't resist putting in something English. Yes, it's designed by William James Neatley again, who had designed the Harrods Meat Hall. And this is an amazing balustrade by Alexander Bigot in front of the Majorelle Villa in Nancy. Again, it's just to show you that wherever you go, you're going to find ceramics. They want to bring in color. This is inside the Hospital San Paul. So this is Dominecki Montenegro, so we're in Barcelona. It's not just Gaudi. And this is one of the most remarkable buildings in Milan, which is entirely covered on its facade with ceramic panels of ladies semi-clad picking grapes and flowers on the Via Malpenghi. It's a little epicenter for Art Nouveau design, or I should say Liberty design in Milan. Mosaic to finish up. The amazing mosaic at the top is by Miska Rott and is on a bank. It's just no longer a bank building, the Torok Bank in Budapest. He combined glass mosaic with Jolne ceramics. So this was a panel made for one of the international exhibitions. So both of these are by Miska Rott. This one down the bottom is designed by Dominecki Montenegro and is on the front of the Paula de Catalunya. And this one is a close-up because he worked with a lot of very talented craftsmen. And here you can see you've combined, again, two materials. So the background is glass mosaic, but the head of the lady is ceramic. So they push things to the limit in terms of combining different materials together. So Miska Rott and Louis Dominecki Montenegro at the cutting edge of this idea that you can sort of mix and match different materials. And in Brussels, the big art form is sgraffito. So this is the Paul Cauchy house. Sgraffito was his speciality, and the whole front of his house was an advert. Sgraffito is when you incise lines in the plasterwork and then fill it in, as you can see, with painted decoration. And it doesn't matter whether it's expensive or, housing for the middle classes. Sgraffito is everywhere in Brussels. We're on the Rue Van der Schrank down the bottom with a giant peacock in the center. So I leave you with my last building, which isn't really Art Nouveau, but I think it's sort of rather indicative of the way in which tourism has been changing. Let's hope we get back to tourism very shortly. We're back in Porto. This is really neo-Gothic, as you can see, with some touches of Art Nouveau with its graffito. Because it's a bookshop, it's the Livario, Leo and Emeo, and one is holding a bust, the other is measuring a skull. They're the really Art Nouveau part. But this is the most visited building, believe it or not, in Porto because of its staircases. The legend is, and it is a legend, an urban myth, that J.K. Rowling was inspired by these to create her amazing staircases in Hogwarts. This is another view of the staircase, which rather alarmingly sort of goes counterintuitively as far as I'm concerned. On an average, this building gets somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 visitors a year, simply because of the Harry Potter factor. So this is the way in which travel is changing. Tourism now isn't just about visiting, iconic museums or even visiting iconic buildings. It's what takes the traveler's imagination. And you can do an entire trail of J.K. Rowling in Porto. So I dare say that you're exhausted after that run round all of Europe. So I'm going to leave you at the back of the Art Nouveau Centre in Aveiro in Portugal, because I think you all deserve a rest and a cup of coffee after that. I know I certainly do. But, you know, I've had a fabulous life traveling and studying Art Nouveau all over Europe and even America. So here it is. You can find it on Amazon, but you'll also find on my Amazon page all my books on the Pre-Raphaelites. They're not expensive, that's good news. And you can see I've included quite a few of the images I've shown you today. Pietro Fenoglio's window, the Cauchy house, and obviously my front cover is the Antonio Gaudi roofscape. I have my own YouTube channel, so that's Anne Anderson Art and Design History channel, where I post things. You'll find lots of short videos and longer lectures, because I do a lot for the Art Society. And in fact, tomorrow morning I will be online for Greater London Art Society, giving a whole morning on just Riga. So I'm doing 3 cities. I'm doing Budapest, then tomorrow Riga, and then finally Turin. So if you keep an eye on my YouTube site and you want to learn more about those cities, those lectures will be posted. Okay.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, and that's my email site. So my web page, so not my email, my web page, anne-anderson.com, where you can keep abreast of all the things that I'm up to.